Okay, so as it starts to warm up and I see that the grand millennial trend is coming back around, every single year there's a conversation about Southern and Western styling that is always looped together as being Western styling. And as someone from the South, I don't think that's accurate. Matter of fact, I find it to be incredibly frustrating. But also as someone from the South, making the differentiations is important, but understanding the history and the reason why these differentiations are so important needs to be discussed as well. And I've said on my TikTok, and I believe it to be so deeply true, once we start to address the reasons why certain things have happened and start to learn and grow from them and properly respect them, we can move forward in a much better place. So today I'm going to talk about why Western and Southern styles and Southern clothing is different and why it is impactful to understand, especially now in today's current climate. I have to touch on the history kind of loosely, because I'm not a history professor. This is not my TED Talk, but I will be doing a TED Talk one day. I'll let you know when. Basically what happens is this. European colonizers come over and they start settling here with indigenous people. And indigenous people start to get sick and die. Because what? They brought disease over. That's a whole other conversation that we could discuss at a later point. But the point is that they bring this over and a lot of people are dying. As well as it turns out that the visitors, who are the newcomers, are not as nice as the indigenous people are. And so indigenous people start getting pushed to the wayside and colonization starts to happen and they start to disperse from the north, going down the eastern seaboard. And as we start to see this, again, a lot of indigenous people are dying. And during this time, they were also trying to enslave these people, enslave the people that helped them. Wow. But yes, they need help learning about the land, tilling the land, growing food on the land, but they're not really getting the same help that they used to have because what? The colonizers came over and started destroying things. These people have to decide what they're going to do. Some people want to go back, but much in a conquistador manner, like the ships are burned or they just can't make it back because they know they're going to die because they're sick. So they end up going to this other place called Africa. Africa, by the way, is a continent. It is not a country. They go over there and they start participating in human trafficking. Chattel slavery did not become a thing until Europeans created it in America. Chattel slavery is much different than most slavery accounts throughout history. This is the final boss of fucked up. Just to clarify, this is important to understand. So they start bringing over African people and then they start having them work the land and till the land alongside indigenous people while indigenous people are dying out because, again, they cannot handle the disease from the Europeans as well as some of the new diseases that were from Africans because globalization hasn't been what it is today. Like, essentially, think about how you have to get vaccines before you travel certain places. That's why. As this is happening, now they're starting to colonize parts of the South. And as we get ready to go into Western expansion, like big Louisiana Purchase with the French people come over, also again influencing style. They sell that, and then we have massive Western expansion. Again, we're running into more indigenous people, Mexican people now, and then there is Polynesians and East Asians that start to come over as well to help with the expansion of the West. Think California. During this time, everybody is kind of rising and growing in power and wealth. The South decides, hey, we want to succeed. Fuck you guys. Basically, the North, really being like Washington, D.C., the president at the time was like, I don't really like that. So how are we going to stop them from continuing to grow wealth? Oh, they're cash crops. How do we get rid of them having cash crops and being successful at this? Let's get rid of the slaves. That's why Abraham Lincoln got rid of the slave. Like, y'all get that, right? I know you don't because I've read some of y'all's textbooks. That's why he got rid of slaves, not just because he woke up one day and said, only other humans is bad. He was like, it's morally gray. So he's like, it's morally gray. Get rid of slavery. Now, this affects specifically the South. The North and the West aren't dealing with that in the same type of way. And this allows the North and the West to continue to grow. Now, like I mentioned previously, you have a lot of people over here. You have Polynesians, Asians, Mexicans. Now you also have freed or, runaway enslaved people also over there. You have white people over there. It is a big hodgepodge. And even though I wouldn't say everyone is created equal in all eyes of everybody, because there is hierarchies and caste systems that are obviously still in place to this day, it is not to the same extent that the South is dealing with. Also, to further legitimize their places in said hierarchy, some of the people from the West are marrying people from over back in Europe. Between the wealthy have this like international bond and link between them. And so that also influences how things are worn over here. The North is also kind of a part of it, but it's still very different because the North is more based in a certain tradition style that is similar to the South. They continue forward. West and the North have a Gilded Age, while the South, Reconstruction era, quite frankly, like that Taylor Swift song, they never quite leave that place. Even hundreds of years later, they never quite leave that place. And because of the social hierarchies and caste systems that they developed here, the traditions that they maintain, they do not expand forward out of resentment, hatred, frustration, and anger. So at a time when the then president, I believe it was still Abe Lincoln, said, hey, I get it, y'all's economy got up because you're still part of America. I'm going to give reparations to the slave owners. The literal, like these people, black people. So he gives reparations to the slave owners, not to the African American people now. And when he leaves office, I believe by death, assassination. The next guy that comes in is like, yeah, that 40 acres and a mule, we're not giving it to you. We're not helping you. Matter of fact, Jim Crow era is going to start. And this starts or maintains a divide, kind of furthers the divide. So now we're kind of caught up to speed on history. And we could talk about how the history of such has affected Western versus Southern style. So when we're talking about Western and Southern style, you have to understand that most Southern style is based in some type of form of tradition as well as binary. Hi, Editing Jordan. One of the important things to note is that hierarchy isn't just about like, oh, who's on top, who's on bottom, but also about who's allowed to be considered as participating in hierarchy, because Black people were still seen as subhuman by slave owners, and the trickle-down effects of it, racist white people who want to hold white supremacy continue to do such. We are literally watching people play around with the concept of eugenics every single day, which is playing kind of into that concept of hierarchy. Who gets to be seen as human? Who gets to be seen as valid? Who gets to be seen as good? And yes, of course, that does include the racial caste system that they created to allow chattel slavery to survive as long as it did and have the rippled effects out from then. But this also did extend to gay people, other non-white people, and even like white people of just different religions. That's where we get the whole WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and the conversation about like even Kennedy, who's considered old money, which he kind of is, kind of not. But the Kennedys being Catholic and like why that was such a big deal. It's like all of that stuff in hierarchy, who's allowed to participate, what is seen as valid, what is seen as not. There are very specific things that are seen in Southern culture as being made for men and for women. Where over in the West, it feels like there's a lot more flexibility with this. I do want to say that in the West, I personally think the way that I see it, a lot of styling choices, clothing choices are either based in... Also, it's the cultural differences because you have so many different cultures. So what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and what it means to wear said clothing is also very different. I think that when you look at pretty much almost anybody else outside of like European culture, men and women's clothing, even though it is gendered, it is not so staunchly different, if that makes sense. I think about like Arab culture, like there are certain things for women, there are certain things for men, but a lot of the silhouettes are somewhat similar. I think about like some traditional like dynasty, because I've been watching Mr. Queen, but like dynasty Korean like clothing, a lot of it has like similar-ish silhouettes, whereas I feel like when I'm looking at European silhouettes, they are vastly, vastly, vastly different. Like from pants to dresses, the tailoring, the layering, all of that stuff. Even the way that we wear like color, or well, not we, but Europeans wear color, and like the fact that men don't really wear color while women do. I just find that to be interesting. I do think that's worth noting that traditionally speaking, I think that is part of the reason why in the South, like it's very binary man versus over in the West where it seems to be like a little bit more generous with styles. It's because so many different cultures. Being utilitarian, or they're based in experimentation that is maybe not necessarily welcomed, but understood that it's going to happen because you have so many different people over there. The South was not like that. Matter of fact, I would say even to this day, I'm from Dallas. Dallas is very diverse in skin tone, but not diverse in anything else. On a Sunday, you're probably going to church, you're probably watching football later, and you're probably eating some type of red meat. right? And I know someone's like, that doesn't sound that big of a deal, but people don't have a whole ton of different hobbies. And I think it's because of, again, the structure that I was talking about. In the South, like I was kind of discussing, there are certain things that to me just read as particularly Southern. Pearls, lace, cotton, white linen, dresses particularly. I think the SEC couple is one of those things that has also carried over from the antebellum era and then also the Jim Crow era. So this like white couple who girl is this very prim, proper, very typical idea or stereotypical idea. It's this very default Barbie-esque, big blonde hair, teased up to the heavens, very tiny frame, very tiny girl, wearing things that are like tiered lace dresses. Anything from Love Shack Fancy damn near screams like Southern antebellum to me because of the way that they're structured. They're meant to feel significantly girly. They're meant to kind of have this antiqued, old-timey feel. And I think it's because traditions there have been the only thing that people could hold on to during this transition time, particularly through the Reconstruction era, which quite frankly scared white people. They were so, and it always goes back to this. White people in the South were scared that Black people would treat them how they treated them. Write that down. And when we go back to that thing where I talked about chattel slavery and how it was created by those European settlers who came to America and took it over, you know, like that's important. Because again, it had not been seen like that before. Indentured servitude, often what Irish and Italian people talk about, that was a thing. No one's negating that. But not like chattel slavery. So when you were going through this era of construction where hierarchy was being tested and you couldn't really put a foot on anything, you didn't really know what to do, what to say, how to do, how to say. You could only rely on certain things. And this binary code of men wear this is what men do, this is what men are, this is how men dress was really important, because also at the time, newly freed people were trying to learn this space, this hierarchy, so that they could assimilate into this new culture that they had been kept out of. Because as much as it's talked about, you know, Black women not being allowed to be seen as women, to be seen as soft, docile, damsel-like, it's because of these hierarchies, these tropes that were made to help separate people from people, meant to say, well, Black people deserve this. It was conditioned to think that these people were less than. So you would see, again, like Black people in these torn clothing, in this dull and dirty clothing. They weren't wearing it to the styles of good, respectable people. That's also why the whole sagging situation is always interesting to me. What it meant to style yourself that goes against what they feel, the tastemakers feel is appropriate. And so, like I was kind of saying with the West, you had a lot of people who weren't allowed to experiment with style. You had to stay within the confines of, for protective reasons. I talk about that in my last video with political styling. You have stuff like the dresses, the lace, the hoop skirts, the particular styling that you see again in couples like the SEC couple. You see certain traditions of wearing jewelry certain ways to kind of help establish your hierarchy. Even having china and how you set up hosting events, what you wear. I know we talk about the 20-year cycle, but that cycle goes back even more so because of the way that Southern people hold respect, or held, because I don't always feel like it's the same now, but they would hold respect for their elders. So maybe your grandmother had a dress from the antebellum South that she held on to, hoping that maybe one day her daughter, her daughter-in-law, whoever would wear it, and it ends up getting passed down generations, and now you have this dress that's 150 years old in an attic that your grandmother can't wear anymore because everyone's gonna know your grandmother was a racist that liked to beat the shit out of her slaves. And you try to rework a way to bring it into your life while respecting other people to a degree. And again, not even respecting, just you don't want to be seen as a racist, but you want to incorporate elements, maybe not the heritage. Maybe you're one of those heritage is not hate, even though it was hateful when they were doing it. Now you want us to forget about it. Even though literally my great grandmother was a slave. But I digress. I need to stay focused. Certain aspects of jewelry certain styles and certain things. It was very poignant. For men's styles, I don't know as much, but you can tell when a girl is like very Southern. There's this certain hyper femininity that's seen. Whereas in the West now, when it comes to Western styling, a lot of the clothes are kind of loose. A lot of the clothes have a lot more color. I think a lot of the color comes from the fact that East Asian people and then also Native American, indigenous people use a lot of saturated color in their clothing. You'll also typically see a lot of leathers. I feel like leather is really popular because of the way that they would use the whole cow or the whole bison. Again, speaking about indigenous people. Gold has always been really popular and really big in other cultures. So when we see it, gold in African, Asian, and American culture, because California gold, it's always really impactful. I think it's kind of seen as being gauche in the South when you have certain things that are too flashy. You want to always kind of be subtle, and I think it comes back from who had money in the South, because not every white person was a slave owner, but you didn't want to separate yourself too much from these other people, because then it would create division amongst yourselves instead of with whom. You're getting where what I'm saying. You're getting how fashion is political. Damn, these cats can really spit. But in the West, it was different. And even as we talk about like gold being different, silver was also really big for indigenous people. The respect that people have, especially as we talk about Beyonce and Cowboy Carter, the respect that people have saying, hey, if you're going to buy turquoise, buy real turquoise from indigenous people to respect their culture. Don't buy the copy. You see how that's important? But in the South, when people are saying, particularly Black people are like, hey, this is my culture, I want it respected, they're like, no, share this with us. Women weren't allowed to wear our natural hair out. And even as we talk about that, like T-on scarves, the head wraps that Black people had to wear, that then they started, really turning out looks with. But it's those aspects of like how that builds into culture. Headscarves to me always seem very Southern. Head wraps always seem very Southern. The adornments, the dainty jewelry is very Southern. Again, not to flash too much, to draw attention to yourself. Because especially as a Black person in the South, if you get too flashy, someone's going to say, come about that. And if you had family like mine, my grandfather living through the entirety of the Jim Crow, my mom at the tail end of the Jim Crow, you know that white people become sometimes uncomfortable in the South where they were emboldened at times to act crazy, get crazy. Let's not forget the woman that got Emmett Till murdered, that little boy. You know that there's always that possibility, so you got to move with this type of understanding and with your head on this type of swivel that I don't know is similar to the West. Because I also look at, specifically LA culture, LA Black culture, and the adornment of jewelry and all of the different stones and what it means to wear this stuff. I look at the jeans and it's like denim is really popular in the West. And I think denim is obviously popular here. It's like a very American thing now. But I feel like denim in a sense has been adopted by the South because it was more workwear. It was seen as the great Western frontier to wear that and to explore those places, and then workwear kind of through the Midwest. But you always had your Sunday's best in the South. Like that was when you knew you put it on. You know what I'm saying? Like the cottons and the light colors. And the light colors were supposed to also signify, you didn't have to worry about working, because if you worked, you would get your clothes dirty. Now, that's one of those traditions from the North that trickled down. But you didn't have to worry about that stuff. So you could wear light colors. You could wear this. You could wear that. Having so many different types of outfits for specific things, I also see as being very Southern. Versus in the West, where it might have been harder to get those materials made back then or processed into whatever type of clothing. And that's why you relied a little bit more on the same dress over and over again, or wearing leathers that were going to have a certain type of longevity. And kind of how I want to round it out as I think about it, the West and technically the North had these relationships with all of these other people, like I mentioned, with like color and color saturation. And so you see different silhouettes more often. you still see the same silhouettes here in the South. You still see certain things that feel like it harks back to that era, because not only was that an era where people felt comfortable and confident, but it's an era and a time of wealth in their heads. You know what I'm saying? This was a time of wealth in the South, and we haven't ever seen wealth like that again, because, again, instead of focusing on making the South generally a better place to live for everybody and doing things like, again, respecting people's differences and realizing why those differences exist, they work to separate people based off class divide, but also off of the divide of your skin. So you're supposed to sit here and tell me that I can't even say you're supposed to, because I saw it happen. When I was like 15, I had a little white boyfriend. My family was like, don't bring him down here. Not because we don't like him, because we don't want the entire town losing their ever-loving mind. They didn't have an integrated prom till like 2009. And that's because the kids didn't want the integrated prom. So a lot of stuff is still separate. A lot of stuff is still behind. A lot of stuff is still kept differently because it benefited a small few at the top in the South. And that is why we see so many people with different things and different influences in the West, is because those type of people, that type of stuff had been interjected in as it was built out, if all of that makes sense. And that's why we see the difference in Western style, because you had the opportunity to express style differently. Whereas in the South, you still had to watch how you wore things, watch how you came off, because these hierarchies and these situations, and like they would have to ask themselves, is it worth it to go up against the guy who would do that? In any capacity, is it worth it to challenge him? In any capacity. And Black people did. Don't ever get it twisted. Obviously, the civil rights movement happened. But what happened in return? They destroyed that city. Selma, Alabama, they said, we're never going to have that happen, because if they could create that divide, they will. And if they can't, then they'll separate you. They'll disperse you. They'll make sure that you never come to that power again. Those people at the top still maintain it. They do it again, like I've been saying, through fashion. This is why we don't see fashion differently. And we have to respect that fashion is different, not only for the people that it directly affects, the people of color and Black people, but also for the fact of put some respect on the name of the people who were here afterwards. You know, Black women, and I think about Southern Gothic, and honestly, when you type it in, it's a lot of white girls, because right now this trope of Southern Gothic is being used to explore the feminine experience, which I think is cool. The regalness and the uniqueness and the DIY aspects and the way that Black women create for themselves, Black people in general, from the way that the suits look different and the styling is different, all of this in and of itself can be rebellious. It could be rebellious. It could be self-preservation. It could be preservation of history. The fact that they used braids to tell people how to get to freedom. All of this is incredibly important. And if you snuff out Southern history in a certain way, you also snuff out the experiences of those before you, which then prevents us from not only learning about the history, but making sure the history doesn't repeat itself and allowing for us to do better as a people and as a society at large. So when I talk about my pearls, I'm not talking about pearls in the same antebellum way. I'm talking about pearls in like. And so when I'm talking about, you know, the way we wear our hair and Sunday's best in the grease, and like the wearing of the white dresses could sometimes mean purity. It could mean celebration. It could mean a homegoing service, a passing. It can mean so many different things. And we have to respect that in Southern culture, because there's certain things that just don't translate, like motorcycle boots. Yes, people ride motorcycles in the South, but that's still like an open road, open concept, conquering in the sense of like the Great West. It's not the same down here. We wear boots. Cowboy boots arguably are dress boot. You have dress boots, then you have riding boots, but still people wear Still people wear English boots because of the influence of the North and the South. And that, to me, English boots are Southern to a degree. You get it if you get it. English boots are not Southern in the West. I don't even feel like people in the West wear boots like that. I hope that this made sense. I feel like I talked a lot. I feel like I got it better than last time. It's been considerably hard to talk about it because I get so heated, because as a Black woman from the South, there's a certain level of erasure that feels like it's happening that I have to tell my story about. And maybe I'll come back to this at a later date, especially with the political climate right now. I feel like it has to be discussed. Not all Southerners think and feel the same. And I know not all Republicans do either. And if we want to do better, we have to look at the history of and call it for what it is and change the outcomes today, so we will have a better tomorrow, even if tomorrow takes some time. Thank you for listening to my speech. I might get a teleprompter one day and write this thing out. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Bye. I'll see you in the next video, and more videos are to come. This just took a really long time.